All right, joining me now is Rose Gottemoeller, who is a lecturer, senior lecturer at Stanford's International Studies program, and she is a former Deputy Secretary General of NATO. She worked at the Carnegie Institute in Moscow, and she has been the chief negotiator of arms control agreements with Russia. Rose, it's always an honor to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Dana.
I spent my morning, because of our time zone change, while you were sleeping, I was listening to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres speaking at the UN General Assembly today with all the world's leaders there. He was bleak. I mean, he issued a dire warning that the world is moving in the wrong direction, faces a pivotal moment, quote unquote, where continuing business as usual could lead to a breakdown of global order in a future of perpetual crises. Now, he's talking about a lot of things there. I mean, there's global warming, there's the pandemic, but also he is referring to just nation conflict around the world. Can I get you to just to speak in on that?
Obviously, China is striding big across the Indo-Pacific right now, and that has caught everyone's attention. And there's a question out there whether China will be interested in the tools of diplomacy. Famously, Chinese diplomats are now known as wolf warriors, which means they're throwing their weight around, but not necessarily willing to come to the table and look for agreement on the basis of mutual interests. And so that's the big question right now, I think, for many. Is there a way to come to some mutual interests with China, and so to be able to sustain stability in the world, but in the Indo-Pacific particularly? And then, as always, we have the continuing strife, the fight against terrorism, situation in Afghanistan deteriorating so sharply and quickly that one wonders whether we have actually made much progress in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism in the last 2 decades. So I think those must have been on the UN Secretary General's mind.
And he spoke about China. I mean, he said that our world is creeping towards two different sets of economic trade, financial technology rules, two different approaches in the development of artificial intelligence, ultimately two different military and geopolitical strategies. It's a recipe for trouble, he said. It will be far less predictable than the Cold War.
Yes, I think that is a worry. Of course, the United States and its allies came out of World War II able to establish the rules of the road, and they did so quite successfully, including the financial rules of the road, banking, in addition to military and strategic power, and some rules of the road to govern those aspects of power as well. So now the question is China, and Russia with it, going to throw over all those existing rules, which have proven their value, although in some cases they definitely need an update. They need strengthening and refurbishing. But are they going to continue to abide by those rules or insist on a new set? Once again, my worry is that it will not be on the basis of any mutual interest, but with only their own national interest in mind.
Enter this submarine deal with Australia, where the United Kingdom and America replace a contract that's almost on the table for signing with France, as it's been described. Instead of diesel submarines, they're going to supply nuclear-powered submarines. The French are furious, describing it as a stab in the back. Do you think it was a stab in the back to a NATO ally of France?
I think it was a brilliant stroke in many ways. It did establish that the United States means business with its partners, Australia, with the UK as an ally. Of course, it means business in the Indo-Pacific. So in that way, it was a brilliant stroke. But in my view, it was done without strategic imagination because it left the French out. The French really are those who can help, I think, to deliver on a submarine deal with Australia. So they should have also been at the table. So I just think it was a failure of strategic imagination here.
You're deputy head of NATO at one point. What do you think the conversation is in the hallways of NATO right now? This is a major split in the alliance.
NATO's had a couple of shocks lately. I spoke a moment ago about the situation in Afghanistan, the rapid US withdrawal. Now, they did have warning that the US was going to leave, but in the immediate days in the run-up, I think the NATO allies were surprised about how fast the United States headed for the door in Afghanistan. So that was shock number one. And on the heels of it, then came this deal with the Australians that shut the French out. And not only was the United States keeping quiet, but also the UK, another NATO ally, was keeping quiet and not letting the French know anything about it until the shock of the day of the rollout. So it was really, I think, not good for the transatlantic bond. President Biden came into office saying he was going to repair the damage done to the transatlantic bond by President Trump. And now it really looks like the Biden administration is continuing to deal out shocks to NATO.
Should NATO do something? I mean, the European Commissioner, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that, expressing dismay, it's unacceptable. She's demanded that President Biden provide an explanation, but beyond that, she feels that there has to be a course correction and that you just can't continue on doing business as usual now with what's happened with this deal with Australia.
I think it's okay to show righteous anger at this moment. The United States, Washington, needs to be put on notice that it made a mistake in not reaching out, working with its allies in a better way in these recent occasions. I don't think there's any problem with that, but in the end of the day, it's going to be up to the Europeans themselves to come up with some solutions. I think, for example, we have an 18-month consultation period between and among the US, UK, and Australia on this submarine deal. The French should come forward with a proposal based on what they have to offer in the way of submarine and nuclear propulsion technology and say, hey, let's sit down together. We can help you through this.
Why don't you like the idea of Australia getting nuclear-powered submarines? Some of the analysis that I've read from military analysts have said that it was really diesel submarines for Australia was a kind of a dead duck in its own way, that if they really want to be effective in the Indo-Pacific region, they need long-range nuclear-powered submarines that can stay submerged for long periods of time, that the diesel submarines are outdated. I mean, didn't this have to happen? And isn't it a good thing for those trying to rebalance China's reach in the Indo-Pacific?
The irony here is that essentially, yes, the answer is they need nuclear-powered submarines, but what kind of nuclear-powered submarines? The irony here is that the United States, after years of a very firm and strong policy against using highly enriched uranium in nuclear propulsion for any state who is not a nuclear weapons state, and there are reasons for that, because highly enriched uranium can be put directly into new nuclear bombs. So we didn't want to hand out the material that would make nuclear bombs to other countries who are not nuclear weapon states. Now, after 60 years of this very firm hardline policy to bolster nuclear nonproliferation, the United States is handing HEU, highly enriched uranium, to the Australians. Yes, the Australians are squeaky clean in terms of the nonproliferation regime. They've never wanted nuclear weapons, but now they are going to have highly enriched uranium for their nuclear submarines if the US and UK deal goes forward as it's described. But the irony is that the French have been building and operating submarines for years on low enriched uranium, which is not a danger for proliferation. And really, I would think, would ease this problem if, again, the French were at the table and talking about how to best build nuclear submarines for Australia.
You think President Biden should think again?
I think it would be worthwhile for not only President Biden, but Boris Johnson, Morrison in Australia, and President Macron to think again about how they can do a better deal that won't endanger the non-proliferation regime.
Is there a cascade which occurs in security and proliferation if this goes ahead with Australia? Then, some people have talked about Brazil wants nuclear technology for its submarines. South Korea would like to have a nuclear submarine program to respond to growing threats from North Korea. What might Russia do with some of its prospective customers out there that would like the same technology?
Oh, yes, Russia has been working already with India to provide it nuclear submarine technology, and no doubt would see this deal with Australia as easing the way to further proliferation of nuclear submarine technology using highly enriched uranium. The ROK, South Korea, no doubt also has its eye on this capability, and Japan has signaled it's already part of the Quad, which is India, the United States, Australia, and Japan. It's already signaled that, hey, this looks like an interesting deal perhaps for us as well. So I could see a wide-ranging proliferation of highly enriched uranium technology, again, for nuclear propulsion. But don't forget, HEU can be taken from a propulsion program and put into a nuclear weapons program. And that's the worry here, that we may be facing wide proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world, and we need to avoid that. So the question is, can we, as I put it, can we do a three-cornered billiard shot? Can we give Australia the long-range submarines it needs? Can we put together a group of countries, allies, and partners that work together, including France and the Asia Pacific? And can we preserve and strengthen the non-proliferation regime? We ought to be looking for ways to do all three at once, and I think it's quite possible.
Why do you think that the Biden administration, the Johnson team at number 10 Downing Street, why do you think that they did this? Why do you think they kind of kept it quiet and didn't talk to France, and then came out and then announced it as some kind of great, triumphant, it's a great defense triangle between them and Australia? Why do you think that they did it?
Well, it's always easier the fewer people you have at the negotiating table. That's just a basic fact of negotiations. So I'm sure it seemed convenient to begin with. And also, it is true that the US and UK have been leading the way with inserting military force into the Indo-Pacific for many years, but particularly in ensuring rights of innocent passage and international waterways are open in the South China Sea. And so there, I think, is a kind of natural partnership already in place there that the French have not been present in. And so that's probably one of the factors here. But I'm sure there are also some defense industrial interests at play, and all kinds of factors could have influenced the particular behavior.
Who do you think is best placed now to press a button on a rethink? Is it NATO? Is it the EU? Who is going to get these people to go back, the US and the UK and Australia, and rethink this and include France this time?
I think there's a place for voices on the outside, particularly those who want to defend the non-proliferation regime. And I expect and hope we'll see some good ideas come out of the expert community on the outside saying, hey, there are some better ways to do this. Let's look at the French LEU options. Let's consider how we can put this program together in a better way. So that kind of expert help will be important. But again, I think it's important for the capitals themselves to take initiative. And once the first white heat of anger is over, for Paris to step forward and to make an offer, and then for Washington, for Canberra, and for London to take it seriously. So these capitals are going to have to work together.
Rose Gottemoeller, I never knew that you were a billiard player, but now I've learned something today. A three-quarter, what was it again?
A three-cornered billiard shot.
It's great to talk to you, Rose. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana.